Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to our final webinar in the National Tribal Energy Roundtable series, the Trail of Chiefs Energy Corridor. So, to give you a little bit of information when it comes to USDA. So, USDA is the United States Energy Association. We are a nonprofit, apolitical, non-lobbying organization founded in 1924. Our mission has two pillars of equal importance: serve as a resource by convening energy stakeholders to share policy, scientific, and technological information to foster the advancement of the entire energy sector. Internationally, USDA promotes energy development by expanding access to safe, affordable, sustainable, and environmentally acceptable energy in partnership with the United States government. So to go over a little bit of housekeeping first, I would like to tell you about how we are going to be recording this session. We'll be recording it, and should you have any questions, you can put them down in the Q&A section. With that, we have our speaker, Daniel Cardenas, who will be taking it from here.
Thank you, Crystal. Excuse me. Thank you to the participants, to the audience for joining us. As Crystal mentioned, this is the last of the series for now, as hopefully we will continue with our partnership between ourselves and the United States Energy Association. So keep tuned for that. It's been really a great series, this second phase that we've done over the last summer. Been able to get into more detail on some specific issues. And so I think it's been really great to get sort of start these conversations that these needed conversations in the Indian country. And so it's been a pleasure. And so today, my partner, CJ Stewart, had a family emergency, so may or may not show up, but we'll play that by ear. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Daniel Cardenas. I wear many hats. One obviously is helping to host these webinars in regards to this roundtable in regards to energy and energy sovereignty in Indian country, in partnership again with USDA and DOE, Fossil Energy Carbon Management Office. Also, so it's been to me it's been a really good series and a good education for myself. The other hat that I wear obviously is the CEO of the National Tribal Energy Association, which represents the four largest energy producing tribes. Between them, they produce over 90% of on a BTU basis, 90% of all the energy in Indian country. The Navajo Nation, the Southern Ute tribe, Crow Nation, and the MHA, three affiliated tribe. Primarily fossil energy producers, but they're starting to diversify their energy mix into renewables and other types of energy and infrastructure. And so, today's talk really is a segue for Indian country to start talking really about infrastructure. So moving from just plain energy producers, which is important, whether it's through extraction, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's power generation, solar and wind. This talk today is going to be about what we call the Trail of the Chiefs energy corridor and the formation of a consortium led by tribes to develop this corridor. And so it's something that we're starting to hear in Indian country about tribes getting involved in infrastructure. First infrastructure that crosses their reservation. There's a tribe in California that is developing transmission in partnership with Southern California Edison. There's a tribe in Oregon the Warm Springs tribe, which is just announced that they're going to be developing a $700-800 million transmission line or upgrading that line that goes from their hydro facility over to, I believe, Portland General. And so you're starting to hear a little bit more about some of this transmission and infrastructure that's needed for tribes to get into this business. And so that's really what the genesis of um, of this idea and this concept was. And so we'll start, see if I can get this going. Uh, so this is our first slide, and really, it's really important. It gives you an overview of sort of what we've been thinking. So over the last 2 years, we've been talking with various folks from the states, from the state of Wyoming, from the state of Colorado. Um, we've reached out to folks from two of the national labs, uh, the Idaho National Lab and the Los Alamos National Lab, to sort of help us think about this idea and sort of work through putting it on paper, as well as our partners at the Colorado School of Mines, the Payne Institute, that are also major partners in this, and they've helped us to develop a white paper, which this presentation reflects the information in the white paper. So once we're done with this, if you want a copy, if anybody in the audience wants a copy of the white paper, if you already don't have it, I'll gladly send you a copy. It's a much more detailed. But again, the Payne Institute at the School of Mines, Colorado School of Mines, helped us to put that together. So really, what we've been talking about initially. So as I said, this has been going on for 2 years, basically. But this idea in my head um, has existed there for the last 2 decades. Um, and so, uh, and then the genesis really, and I have to give credit where credit is due, is back in the early 2000s, maybe even into 2010. I don't remember exactly the years. There was an initiative here between Wyoming, state of Wyoming, the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but and then some entities in Colorado, in New Mexico, and Arizona formed a consortium, basically an organization to develop what they were calling the High Plains Express, which would have been a transmission line that would have went from eastern Wyoming, the plains of Wyoming, through eastern Colorado, down into eastern New Mexico, to catch all the wind along the edge of the Great Plains, the western edge, and then it would have turned west through northern central New Mexico into central Arizona, and then it would have terminated outside of Las Vegas, and that was the High Plains Express. And so that when I was um, at different various meetings of the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority, we've got a lot of presentations on that, and so it got me thinking about what if we could do something similar in Indian country. And so that initiative sort of went away. I think it was ahead of its time. I think it's still needed. But one of the remnants, if you're familiar with transmission, one of the remnants of this initiative is the Sunzia transmission line, which goes from eastern New Mexico into Arizona, into western Arizona. A couple 100-mile line. I believe it's around 300 to 400 miles, maybe even more. Um, it's sort of the southern leg of the High Plains initiative, and so and I think um, uh, that was resurrected and continued, and I think it's going to be really beneficial to New Mexico, Arizona, and ultimately California. But that project is not tribally related. For the most part, it doesn't cross Indian lands, and in fact, um, they made of because at the time the tribes really didn't participate with the developers. they sort of routed their project around Indian country, and so uh, that project is also having some to deal with previously some lawsuits around their project as it crosses into Arizona, and so all that over the last 2 decades, this idea sort of has gelled in my mind, and the conversation around transmission and infrastructure, the energy transition, right, has really heated up during the Trump administration. It really during the Obama administration, right? If you remember, the Obama administration created these rapid teams to sort of push forward infrastructure, sort of push it faster, streamline the permitting and the reviews and the of some infrastructure. So they created these rapid response teams, and for the most part, they really didn't go anywhere. And then as we move into the Trump administration, we start having these conversations around the energy transition much more heavily. And so a lot of folks, right, a lot of the states, federal agencies are starting to talk about or have been talking about transmission and the need for more transmission to sort of gear up for the power generation needs that are going to be needed for the energy transition as we transition, right? The idea as we transition away from fossil energy power into renewable energy. Um, I've always been a strong believer in all the above. I'm a believer in renewables for tribes to develop renewables when they make sense, when they're feasible, when they're financially and environmentally and sustainably feasible. Um, but as well as fossil energy, right? Our trade association represents the four largest fossil energy producers, the largest energy producers, and so we think that all the above has sort of been the messaging that we've been doing and moving across Indian country, and so really those really were the genesis of this idea. So this is just a map for illustrative purposes. It's not set in stone, but the idea initially was to connect 20 plus reservations. The initial um, uh, idea was to start at the Fort Berthold Reservation, which is there in North Dakota here, and then go south and west and terminate in California here around the Torres Martinez Reservation, which is just it borders and it's along the Salton Sea. Um, and so that was the initial concept. After we were talking with, like I said, friends and folks at the national labs, we looked at connecting the Pine Ridge, Cheyenne River, and Standing Rock Sioux reservations in South and North Dakota because of their wind resources. And so, but the idea is over 2,700 mile initial idea was to create a transmission line potentially that would go from the Dakotas through Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado into the Four Corners, and then over into California. Um, uh, and so it's very audacious, it's very large, it would be very expensive, billions of dollars. But I've been a strong believer in an all of the above approach to not only approach to energy development, but I'm also a strong believer in if you build it, they will come concept. And the reason why I even propose this is that in the discussions, what I was finding in the discussions around all the transmission that's going to be needed between the interconnects, which basically is between here in eastern Montana and Wyoming south, and that separates the Dakotas from the west. Um, uh, the eastern, the MISO here, and the WEC, the Western Interconnect, sort of connect here along the Eastern Plains, basically, and there aren't very many connections between the grids, and so this concept sort of would from a tribal perspective, have us be players in this idea of connecting the interconnections and then creating our own transmission, right? Where I was going earlier was in all these conversations around upgrades of transmission, tribes haven't played a big role in this conversation because there's a lot of reasons why it's expensive, it's very complex. Um, there's not a lot of engineers, electrical and power engineers that are tribal folks that work for their tribes to be able to provide information. Some tribes do have some capacity in this space. Some of the tribes here that are listed here have their own utilities. Navajo Nation is one of the major utilities in Indian country. Um, some of these utilities, these tribal utilities, do create their own power generation. Some work with the federal power marketing agencies, which are the Bonneville Power Administration in the Northwest, and then the WAPA, the Western Area Power Administration in the West and Southwest. But those agencies don't. They sort of market federal power, primarily hydro electric from all the federal hydro projects in the Northwest along the Columbia River and in the Southwest along the Colorado River, and then in the northern Great Plains along the Missouri River and various tributaries. So that power that's produced by federal projects is marketed to co-ops and utilities throughout the Western U.S. So basically, BPA and WAPA transmit the electricity and distribute it to the end customers in the Western U.S. They themselves aren't the producers of the power. That's the federal government, whether it's the Bureau of Reclamation or other agencies do that. And so, as I mentioned, what I found was that the tribes weren't participating in this process. And so, as you probably are aware, many of the tribes have been complaining lately about it for a while, not just lately, but have been complaining over the last administration, the last two administrations, about access to transmission so that they can build utility scale power generation projects of all kinds. And that's been one of the barriers, the primary barrier to tribes being able to do that and get into this power generation space, is that they haven't had access to transmission. They don't have the resources to access that transmission because it takes a lot of there's a lot of fees and deposits, millions and tens of millions of dollars worth just to get into that space. That utilities, co-ops, and other agencies and companies do have that kind of money that most tribes don't. And so, it, given all that, in my process, the way my brain works is, uh, I thought, what if we just had our own? If we could just build our own, what would that cost? Where would it go? Where would it be? Um, and not being an engineer, I didn't really have a background to sort of start that process. So we started talking with our friends at the Idaho National Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, various other state organizations and agencies, and started just brainstorming this concept. And so what we came up with was this concept of the Trail of the Chiefs corridor, which is the corridor itself. And then um, I felt like we needed to create a consortium for tribes and other allies, federal agencies and others to join to make this make it a priority, but also to make it happen. It's still very audacious. It may never happen, but I think um, if we don't go through this exercise, for sure it'll never happen. I don't think the tribes have the capacity individually to be able to do it. Not saying that it has to be me or our organization, but I think this is a really good first step. And so what you're seeing today, although folks, partners and others have seen this over the last 2 years or iterations of this is really the first time we've really shown it to the public. So it is a work in progress. And forgive me, I'm not a PowerPoint expert. whiz. So there's not very many pictures. This is probably the only picture this this map. And so we'll start. Um, This presentation outlines the formation and objectives of the Trail of Chiefs Corridor Consortium, which obviously is a proposal. A consortium at this time doesn't exist. It's just still on paper, but because we're making this presentation and introducing this to Indian country into the world, we're going to be moving forward with this idea of creating the consortium as its own organization. So, a project aimed at integrating a wide range of energy technologies and infrastructure across the Western United States, specifically connecting Indian country to the larger energy grid. And so, as I mentioned, you'll hear a lot of mention of transmission and power because that's really what the genesis of this idea came about. But in our conversation, it sort of um, uh, morphed into an energy corridor, which we could move various kinds of energy within a specific right of way or sets of right of ways. And so, although I mentioned connecting into the larger grid, really what I mean is creating a set of infrastructure that will connect the tribal owned and operated infrastructure that would then connect into larger sets of grids, whether it's the energy grid, the power transmission grid, or if it's the pipeline grid, etc. Um, as we envision it, the Trail of Chiefs Corridor Consortium aims to address energy transition challenges across 10 states and 21 tribal nations, spanning approximately 2,600 miles. I believe the initial calculation of the mileage goes from MHA, which is in North Dakota, to California. When we added the reservations and tribes in South Dakota, I don't think I updated that number, but I'll double check. But it's a long span of as miles as you can see, and even at 1,000,000 miles or more, one and a half to five, even up to 10 million dollars a mile, um, uh, going over mountainous areas. You know, it's going to be billions of dollars, depending on the size and scope of a project like this, even if we just focus on transmission. And so it's very large and um, uh, audacious. The consortium aims to integrate various energy technologies into existing infrastructure, fostering economic growth, while respecting cultural and environmental sensitivities. And so, really, again, um, that's the point to this is to be able to create infrastructure from a that makes it utmost and number one priority tribes and our sensitivities, um, which include our cultural and environmental sensitivities, among others. And so we think again, this is going to be first in the nation, um, uh, where not only do we look at the economics and the engineering of physically creating a corridor and the related infrastructure, but our primary goal is to make sure that it's sensitive, that it's sustainable, and that's conducive to tribal values, taken into history, taken into future, taken into everything under the sun, because the idea is that at its foundation, it's going to be owned and operated by tribes. And so who knows more than them on these kind of issues? And these are a lot of the issues, as you know, that face many of our large infrastructure projects. The barriers to many of the projects that haven't moved forward is because they've run into a tribe or more than one tribe and haven't really taken into consideration or thought about um, uh, tribal sensitivities, or I've done it in the middle of the process. Again, with this concept, those sensitivities and needs of the tribes are not only first and foremost, but they're thought of and discussed and planned at the beginning and throughout the whole process. And so I think that's what's really different and unique and innovative about this concept. The Trail of Chiefs corridor supports critical mineral extraction, or none of this is existing, so it's all development, and so it will support critical mineral and mineral extraction, carbon management, which is carbon capture, utilization and storage, and everything that's related to that. Um, Power generation, hydrogen development, water development, and electric transmission line upgrades and expansion. It's driven by tribal organizations, including our National Tribal Energy Association, and this Trail of Chiefs corridor will be a tribal organization. Um, the consortium aims to address technical, economic, financial, social, and environmental complexities. And so, you know, the the whole idea of having a consortium around this corridor is to look at everything above the sun, or below the sun, sorry, that other projects may have not have looked at initially. Um, but the bottom line is, the idea is that, as you saw from the map, we want, with this consortium, we want to look at making sure that um, infrastructure is not only sustainable environmentally, culturally, and historically, but that it's sustainable financially, that it makes that it can be an ongoing and profitable business. Um, so the we can't, here in Indian country, we really can't do anything without partnerships, right? We don't like to recreate the wheel. And so the consortium aims to include, again, it's foundational, and to include tribes and tribal organizations, including tribal communities. Um, our federal partners, our trustees, the federal government, and various agencies, the national laboratories, academic institutions like the Colorado School of Mines, and other universities, including tribal colleges, private industry, which are going to be key, uh, nonprofit organizations, which the consortium will be a nonprofit, and then and state governments, interested state governments. So we've already shared this with the state of Wyoming and the state of Colorado. Just some early concepts. We've shared our white paper, which I mentioned earlier. If you'd like a copy, please let us know, and I can get you a copy of that if you haven't already seen it. Um, so the objective of the Trail of the Chiefs Corridor Consortium aims to establish a 2,600 plus mile geographical energy corridor by evaluating the technical aspects and conducting a comprehensive GIS map of the entire corridor. Uh, it will involve a multidisciplinary team to assess the feasibility, to engage with stakeholder engagement, and to prove up the economic benefits. And so potentially at the end of this process, or at one phase at the end of maybe the first phase of this process, is to be able to have a comprehensive study or plan in place to look at this sort of idea to see if it is indeed feasible. My gut says that it is, but without the science, without the engineering, and without the experts looking at these multidisciplinary experts looking at it, we really can't say. So that approach, as I said, it's going to be a phased approach. So we're going to conduct a phased approach for the development of the consortium that will ultimately develop potentially the Trail of the Chiefs corridor and all the infrastructure and all the interrelated infrastructure. Again, it's complex because we're talking about various energies. Renewables are going to be foundational, but fossil energy, and then all the different kinds of power generation that exist, whether it's transmission lines, pipelines, and then all the related infrastructure that's going to be needed. So all these are going to be layered on top of each other or around each other. So it just adds more complexity, um, uh, but it's needed, right, to ultimately answer this question whether it's feasible and how tribes can participate at their own time scale, at their own pace, and at their own at the level that they're feel comfortable and can afford, not just on the money side, but on the time side. And so it'll start with the formation of, as I mentioned, a multidisciplinary team, which again involves tribes, federal agencies, national labs, which are going to be key, academic institutions, and private companies to assess the technical, economic, and environmental and social aspects. So there's a little bit of repeating, but basically that's really the foundation of what we're trying to do here. So we're going to rigorously evaluate each component of the corridor, including transmission lines, pipelines, water infrastructure, mining, and critical mineral transportation. Um, uh, like I said, we want to really focus on the science, on the economics, and create a data and a product that everybody in the West can be proud of, because it's gonna affect and impact, and positively benefit, the Western U.S. Because as this corridor hopefully gets developed, it will connect into the other infrastructure, that's off reservation, and non-tribally related, and integrate, for the benefit to create, energy security and national security for our country. Um, we're going to utilize advanced GIS mapping techniques to establish a feasible route, considering the physical geography and geology, um, where tribal lands are, because the tribal lands are key, right? The idea is we want to connect the reservations and cross the reservations so that tribes can build projects that can then connect into the corridor and benefit, directly and then indirectly. So tribal lands are going to be key, that they do cross those lands. So as I was mentioning earlier, as an example, and not to call out, the Sunzia project, because I think it's an excellent project, is that, in the past they made an effort to go around, tribal lands. Uh, we're making a concerted effort to cross tribal lands, to bring tribes fully into, this idea. And so also, looking at existing federal energy corridors, as I mentioned before, during the Obama administration, and then moving forward to now, the federal government at different times have created federal energy corridors, to sort of, the idea to, again, to speed up, um, uh, siting and permitting and construction of energy infrastructure, primarily, pipelines and transmission lines. Looking at rights of way, looking at the land ownership patterns, whether whether there's federal, state, tribal, private lands, whether there's national parks, wildlife service, BLM lands. That's going to be really important. And then, looking at environmental and cultural sites as well. And again, a project like this, or this concept, working hand in hand with tribes, we can um, in a culturally sensitive, way, we can be working with tribes, looking at, and not making the information public, but working with them to look at the cultural and historical sites and sacred sites, so that we're not disturbing them. I think that's going to be key, and something that, the average private sector, development doesn't have. Um, we'll be doing extensive community outreach, in collaboration with impacted communities, including the tribes, and other stakeholders, to shape the corridor development, right? Because it doesn't just impact tribes, even though the primary, beneficiaries would be tribes. It's going to impact all our neighbors, on and off reservation, and the states, and those governments, and those entities. And so we really need to work really closely and collaboratively with our neighbors, so that we create a corridor that benefits all. And then finally, and then this is a really important part, is creating a techno-economic analysis to quantify economic benefits, um, potential job creation, how many jobs will be created, when and where, the financial investment that are going to be needed, whether it's from the states, the federal government, tribes, and the private sector, various tax collections, revenue streams, and required stakeholder contributions for the quarter. To me, this is really the most important part, right? Other than everything else that we've mentioned, you know, looking at the techno-economic analysis first, I think is going to be really important, so that we're not. It really needs to be at the beginning. This is not, uh, even though we're doing a phase approach. This wasn't meant. These aren't the phases in this order. Um, and so, this isn't the last phase. So these are going to go in the correct order, that make the most sense. But the important part is to make sure that not only is it technically, um, uh, can be engineered and built, but whether or not it will make economic sense, financial sense to the investors, whether it will provide enough strong enough return to sort of, because all told, we think the impact of this corridor, when everything's said and done, could be in the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. But we can't know that until we actually do the analysis, and that's where our federal and academic partners really, and including the national labs, come in really greatly, because they have those tools that in the country does not have. Um, the tribal initiative and importance. Again, the Trail of Chiefs Corridor consortium will involve at least 21 nations, right? If you look at that map and you count up the different reservations that we potentially will cross, it's approximately 21. There may be other tribes that want to be involved, tribes that don't want to be involved. And so that number may change, but we want to sort of to illustrate that it's more than one, and it's a regional approach rather than a local approach. So will involve these tribal nations, including their respective on and off reservation communities, and I think that's going to also be key, right? Most developments only focus on reservation, especially if they're going to cross reservation or close to reservation. If they don't cross reservation, and they're going to have some impacts to cultural sites. But nobody really talks about off-reservation communities. And you've probably heard me say, at different times, 2/3 of Native Americans do not live on their respective reservation. They live in urban and suburban areas, other places besides their tribal reservation. Only a third of our tribal population actually lives on a reservation, and so we want to also take into consideration the off-reservation communities and needs and wants, because they're never taken into consideration. Um, uh, Indigenous rights, perspectives, worldviews, and needs are of the utmost importance and will be our number one priority and will be respected. So again, these are things that I've mentioned before that will be the priority, and will be we're already talking about them, we're already thinking about them, we're already planning for them even before there's a project. So, this lives even before, and so it'll be the priority throughout the whole process till the end, till we either have a plan, study in place, and then if the consortium wants to move forward, at that later date, this priority will continue to live on into perpetuate, into long into the future. The impact and expected outcome. The Trail of Chiefs corridor aims to enhance the critical U.S. infrastructure for, especially in the Western U.S., for the energy transition, prioritizing technical rigor, interdisciplinary collaboration, and stakeholder engagement. And like I said, we tend to believe that this is not done. Most projects aren't done in this way, and so that's why it's going to be unique and something I think people will want to support, sort of as a model, for project development moving forward. The consortium will manage energy and resource management across the Western U.S., ensuring sustainable development and inclusivity. Um, and so that's my last slide, for this part. If you're interested in more information, if you represent any of those organizations, the federal government, federal agencies, national labs, universities, including tribal colleges. If you're a tribe, represent a tribal organization, represent a state government or entities, or from the private sector, please, if you're interested in learning more, getting a copy of our concept paper, which is a little bit more detailed and longer, or just want more information or want to chat, you can contact me at this email and phone number. And so, this part will stop with this presentation. I can't tell if we have any questions. If anybody has any questions over this portion, I'll keep the presentation up. But I'd like to then move into um, uh, uh, a related discussion about our consortium, about this corridor. But we don't need the presentation for that part. So let's see.
Well, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat in the meantime.
There I go. Sorry, I was again. This is not my thing, and so I was trying to get out of the screen. So, in absence of any questions, but I really did want to move into more of our thought process behind this. And so there is one thing that I will mention as a sort of a good news is last week, I believe on Friday, I got an email from our partners at the Los Alamos Lab, National Lab, and so we'll step back a little bit. As we were developing this concept, creating the white paper, um, brainstorming, we really worked very closely with Los Alamos and their team around electricity and transmission, and so they approached us about uh, applying for some federal resources within the national lab system from the DOE. And so the team was working on that. And finally, we received word that last week that those resources will be forthcoming from the DOE to start the process, do some of the technical analysis on looking at electricity load, and again, just on the transmission side, power transmission side, looking at where the loads are, where looking at some feasibility and kind of thing. So it's very it's very broad and very vague, but as we get more details, we can share those when we're able to. But I just wanted to mention that um, the process is sort of kicked off financially as well. And so when you get a copy of the white paper, you'll see that um, we talk about we don't know exactly how much it's going to cost to actually do this full-fledged study, but we know that it's going to take millions and millions of dollars. And so this is just the start filling in some of the blanks, to do some sort of preliminary work to see to sort of check the feasibility, at least on the power generation side. Um, but we think so that's the news there. I think it's pretty good news, and it was really surprising for me to get that news. So it was sort of as we moved into our election season, and then exactly digesting what happened on Tuesday. Uh, um, uh, I think this concept is very timely as we move into a new administration and as we move forward. I think it's an excellent time to present this and to make it known. But really, I think the value of this potentially, because even though it is wide ranging, right? We could spend millions and years just on talking about transmission, and again, because it's the foundational idea, it's really important because, as you know, Here in the Western U.S., we have a lot of needs. The DOE and partners have been working on the various transmission plans and studies over the last 4 years, which has taken a lot of resources and time um, from the public giving input, including tribes. And so there's a lot of work been happening. But I will still contend that even though some tribes have participated, it really wasn't tribally focused. We're just one of many communities and stakeholders. Even though we have an important relationship with the federal government, a trust relationship, there's various other folks that have more resources to be at the table than we collectively do. And so the point is, we could have just focused on transmission, even though that's where we're starting. But as you know, all these infrastructures are connected, right? If we want to do natural gas, if a tribe wants to move natural gas along this corridor, you still need electricity to move it. If we want to move oil or if we want to move hydrogen, CO2 via pipeline or water, electricity is going to be integral to the movement of those commodities. So it just shows the interconnectedness of uh, of this idea. Also, uh, one of the biggest impacts, just in my gut and what we know, right? We don't have the numbers yet, but we do know that this is an opportunity for tribes to participate fully if they want. They can opt out. They don't have to participate. We can go around their reservation if they don't want us to cross their reservation. It's totally up to them that for them to exercise their self-determination and ultimately to exercise their tribal sovereignty. But we really want to include the tribes and give them all the data, be transparent, give them all the information that they need to make a self-determined decision. And so that's the point to all this is to pull together all the expertise, the data creators, the aggregators of the data that exists, and put it into a format that tribes can understand, that our communities can digest, so it's not overwhelming because a lot of times we get overwhelmed with information. That's sometimes purposely done so that we get intimidated and sort of tune out. And so there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of, like I said, in this time, right, we just went through election, and there's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of things coming forward where people are afraid, people are scared, especially when it comes to the energy transition. Are we going to continue the energy transition? I'd hope so, right? I mean, like I said, I'm an all the above a believer in all the above energy approach, and so this quarter really will serve as many of the needs as possible of any of the tribes that want to participate. Not just for again, this is going to be important for job creation, for power generation, for tribes to own assets and not just be um, uh, royalty owners. Not just to lease lands and let third parties take the risk and get the reward. This is an opportunity for tribes also to take risk and get reward financially, increase their tax base, create jobs, good paying jobs for their communities. Um, and so, uh, but this is sort of the concept. Um, uh, and 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 um, and so as we kick this idea off um, to you, the audience, and as we make this presentation as this video, once it gets published and out there, I firmly intend to sort of push this process to create to form the consortium, not just on paper but in reality, incorporate to add partners, and then go out and start talking with the tribes and other potential partners to jumpstart this process because it's sorely needed. And you as members, um, uh, potentially again, like I said, we'll have a lot of input into this process. Um, and I see we have a question. Catherine Everett says, "What is the size of the transmission line, and is there an allocated amount reserved for each tribe that is part of the consortium?" And so that's a good question. Um, when I initially developed this idea, um, I was looking at something along the line of um, 8 to 10,000 megawatt in size, which would mean at least three lines, 765 kV or higher, um, uh, which depending on the engineering and the length and size of the transmission, each line could potentially do 3 to 4,000 or 2 to 4,000 megawatts each. And so if you add a second line or add a third line, that's when we start getting into the close to 10,000 megawatts, which again becomes really expensive. And so we really haven't outlined that. That was my initial thinking. And if depending on how many reservations it crossed, um, we would look at potentially from 3 to 500 megawatts that would be allocated to each tribe if we looked at each of the tribes equally. If we looked at them on size, that might change and depending on the needs of the tribe. But that was a start. And so the idea, Catherine, is to look at um, uh, to do the study and look at where the load's at, look at what the needs are on the surrounding transmission, on the surrounding areas, and to look at what that could be. So looking at minimums and maximums, right? So we don't have that spelled out yet, but it's a good question and something to think about as we the consortium moves along and as we start creating these plans and documents, as we start doing the science and getting the data, we'll have a better idea of what that could look like, and then also compare it to the cost, right? Um, uh, as what we're finding, everybody, all of us here in this space is finding as um, more projects are being announced around transmission, more projects are being developed. That's creating inflation, right? We're already dealing with inflation just general in this economy. And so the old number of 1.5 to $2 million plus per mile of transmission may be outdated. I don't know. I think it's probably going to tend to be higher. And so on a if it was just flat land going over the plains, going 1,000 miles, that's $1 to $2 billion right there for each line. And so, not wanting it to get out of hand in terms of price and scope, but really that's the point to the plan. So hopefully that answered your question. Um, um, and so um, and that's the opportunity to have the tribes participate is again, like I mentioned, the resources that Los Alamos applied for, and will as negotiations start and as all that as we get a better idea of what's going to be planned and done, um, that the initial proposal was looking at the Western interconnect first. So we're really focusing on the western side of the interconnect. And as you know, North Dakota is kind of like on the edge of between the eastern and the western interconnects. And so um, I don't know all the details yet about which particular tribes, which particular areas we're going to look at first, but we're starting that process. And so it would be great to include your tribe in this consortium because we really do need, like I said, champions for this at our local, at our tribal, at our state levels, and at the federal levels. And that's why I mentioned at this juncture, right? Depending on what happened on Tuesday, I personally think that it was a good election for energy, for all the above energy, including transmission. Um, and so I think that bodes well for this potential consortium and finding the resources needed moving forward in within the federal government. So I think that bodes well personally. And then secondarily, um, I think that as you mentioned, the ancillary um, uh, potential projects in infrastructure and industry that's related to this idea of the Trail of the Chiefs, like critical minerals, like CO2, hydrogen, uh, natural gas, and moving those commodities. I think it gets tribes thinking about the future and about um, collaborating with each other, building upon each other's strengths and weaknesses, and then overall building up the capacity in the space. So, and I'll end with this: is this is just one concept, right? I didn't want to initially. I didn't when I was talking with our partners, Idaho National Lab and the Los Alamos National Lab. I didn't want to overwhelm them with throwing out too many ideas there. So I focused on one, which was this line that this corridor that would go from the Dakotas, again through the Intermountain West down to California. But if you look at the and if you just focus on transmission, um, through the National Transmission Plan and the studies that have been done over the last year or two, there are multiple scenarios where energy needs to move from one region of the country to another. And it tells how many megawatts are needed. Tens of thousands of megawatts are needed all over the West. So California, Southern California, the Southwest needs over 10,000 megawatts just to keep up with the growth. And that's not even talking about AI or data center growth. This is just population growth and industrial growth, keeping up with that. And so the Northwest needs 10,000, I think 15,000 megawatts of power because as climate change happens, as there's less rain in certain areas, that impacts the hydro system, which is Bonneville Power Administration and the WAPA are really their backbone is on hydro, along the Columbia and along the Colorado River. Right, we're seeing elevations of water go down. We're seeing reservoirs being impacted, and that impacts the power production. And so these regions need a tremendous amount of electricity. So potentially, you could put a line that goes from North and South Dakota through Montana, Idaho, into Washington and Oregon. Um, you could put a line. We've looked at looking at a line from Northern California, from the Central Plains, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, going across Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada into Northern California. You can do a line that goes from West Texas through eastern New Mexico, Arizona into California. I mean, and so, or you could do a line that goes north and south between the Dakotas to Texas into the ERCOT. And so that's at least 5 lines of the same kind of magnitude and scope that we could be talking about. And so I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with that. And so, um, uh, um, okay, you have a second question, and I forgot to answer that part. So it says you had mentioned the length of the corridor. What is the width? Um, I'm asking due to the scope of other possible lines being included in the corridor. And again, we don't know yet, right? We obviously we need a width of a line that's hundreds um, um, of feet, if not thousands of feet. Um, right. A lot. Some of the. I'm not sure what the federal corridors look like. I haven't really looked at them in that detail. The width, but you're right. The width needs to be big enough so that we can include other other infrastructure like pipelines in there above and below the ground. And so for sure, that's going to be one of the once we figure out the length, 2,600 miles. Um, uh, the width is really important as well, and it's something that I didn't think about when I first um, came up with the concept. But that again, that's what we're going to also look into. So as soon as we know as soon as we start having preliminary numbers and data that we can share, we will start sharing that within the scope and context of the consortium. And so, given that that Catherine, that you represent your tribe, that would be something that we would look to you and your leaders to potentially be to again to join the consortium, and participate as a full partner in that, and to be able to give, like I said, your two questions were very good, and like I said, some of the things I hadn't, not that I hadn't thought about them, but I didn't include them in the presentation because I just didn't want to overload everybody and in the time that we have. So I think we're up to noon. I'm looking at the list now of the folks who are on the audience, and you have my sorry, I didn't leave it up too long, but I can, if you need a copy of this presentation, I can send it to you. Um, the staff here can send it, and then for sure when the video is ready, we'll get that out to everybody. But I can tell you now, if you want to email me, I'll say my email, and then I can get the white paper out and answer any other questions offline that you have them. So my email is dcardenas, DCARDENAS at trailofthechiefs.org. TRAILOFTHECHIEFS.org. So dcardenas at trailofthechiefs.org. If you email me, I'll send you the info. But I'll be sure, Catherine, I have your email. I'll send you a copy of the white paper and any of the documents a copy of my presentation, and we can chat about it offline. So, Crystal, I'll turn it over to you. But I wanted to thank everybody for joining in.
Well,
Go
we
ahead.
do have one more question for you, if
Oh,
you'd be free to
give me a
answer.
look here. Oh, I didn't see that. Leah Hurley asks, has there been any thought around including fiber optic cable, as it's very common to install power facilities and fiber optic cable together? You're right, Leah. I should have included that. Um, Broadband is included. I just, when I was making the presentation, I failed to include that, but broadband is included in our Trail of Chiefs corridor white paper. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So yes, fiber optic and broadband communications are included in that as well. So um, um, so again, like I said, I wanted to thank everybody. If there's no more questions, for not only joining today, joining us throughout our series. Hopefully, again, there'll be more moving forward. Stay tuned for any news on that. But this has been great, very informative for me. The interactions that we've had online and offline with our audience, and our partners and our friends and allies. And so this again has been a very good experience, and hopefully um, the opposite is true. Hopefully that you guys have gotten something out of this as well, not just today, but throughout the life of the series as well, because that's the whole point, is to be informative, not waste your time, right? And so again, like I said, apologize for my partner Conrad, for CJ Stewart not participating today. He's had a family emergency with a death in his family, and so he had to attend to that. But again, I'll turn it over to Crystal, and this has been great. Thank you again.
Of course, and thank you, Daniel, for leading the way when it came to all of these sessions. And thank you, everyone in the audience, for your participation and your questions. We hope to have more discussions in the future. And until then, if there are no more questions, I'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.